There in a dusty box, he uncovered what turned out to be a never-before-published autobiographical work of our mothers. The package, postmarked 1966, simply said, Lucy. The manuscript was written in the first person and seemed to span Mom's entire life up to 1964. I was stunned. When I read it, I cried. When my brother Desi read the manuscript, he was overcome with emotions. He said, I loved it. I loved reading it. There's a wonderful energy that comes through. A fire in her belly. As a young kid, a sense of adventure. Like, I want to make some noise. Her connections from the past to the present. I salute her for her ability to think in terms of what did I learn from the past. And there's some great, straight from the heart advice. I love the way she wrote about her feelings for Dad. It was very powerful for me to hear about when she first met him. Some people prolong their unhappiness by dramatizing it, like expecting applause for having a headache. Mom does not do this. Instead of over-dramatizing what happened in her life, she seems to be trying to understand what her life is all about. That's what I found most endearing about this autobiography, the way she looked at life, especially regarding her earlier memories and what happened during her most formative years that contributed to the kind of woman, actress, and mother she became. This book gave a much deeper understanding of the pain that she had to assimilate as a child, and the depth of her struggle to achieve the kind of success she eventually did. Now, along with our father's autobiography, a fascinating, fact-filled reminiscence of his life, my brother and I and our children, along with the whole Ball Arnaz clan, have one of the most remarkable, comprehensive family histories ever documented. That is an excerpt from the book I'm going to talk to you about today, which is the autobiography of Lucille Ball. It's called Love, Lucy, and it was written by Lucille Ball. That is her daughter. And her daughter and son were put in charge of her estate. She passed away in 1989. And this book was originally written in the mid-60s. It was finished in 1966, but never published. Her kids did not even know it existed. So they were going through and answering some complicated problems and issues with her mother's vast estate. She's one of the most successful actresses and entrepreneurs who've ever lived. And so there's a lot of things that her daughter and her son had to take care of. And so they contacted an old attorney of Lucy's and were asking a question, and he discovered in some of his old paperwork this unprinted manuscript. And so that excerpt was her daughter discovering the manuscript, reading it, and then talking about the impact that it was having when they read it internally and decided to publish it for the world. And so I want to go back into the introduction because it's her daughter writing the introduction. And I want to pull out a couple ideas because I think it's really important to think about how the lives that we're living right now will impact the people that we leave behind. Before I go there, I want to tell you why I chose to read this book. So all the way back on Founders number 141, I read the fantastic autobiography of Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is the second autobiography. He wrote a short one when he was like 30, and then this one, I think he was close to 70 years old when he read it. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It's just, he had an unbelievable life story. But he talked about Lucille Ball in that book. And there's two things. One, that she gave him his first shot in Hollywood, and he just says she's a fantastic woman. She gave him a shot this is 1974, so Arnold's in his early 30s. Lucille, this is after this is after I Love Lucy. So I Love Lucy was arguably, some people say it's the most successful television show of all time. Some episodes had 60 million people watch it. And so Arnold meets her like a decade and a half after her. She's had wild success with her show. She's unbelievably well known. She's very wealthy, and she saw him give an interview. She thought he was funny. She calls him out of the blue and says, "Hey, I want to give you this part." And she gives him advice. And the advice that she says when he's in his early 30s is something that he would then in turn repeat for multiple decades. I've heard him give speeches 30 years after receiving this advice from Lucy, and now he gives that advice to young people trying to do something difficult. And this is what he said in his autobiography. He said, "Lucille Ball gave me advice about Hollywood. She said, just remember, when they say no, you hear yes and act accordingly. Someone says to you, we can't do this movie, you hug him and say, thank you for believing in me." And so the context of when he gives us advice, he says, listen, you don't listen to naysayers. Everything I did I was told it was impossible. When someone said to me it can't be done, I heard it could be done. When someone told me no, I heard yes. When they said it was impossible, I heard it was possible. And he talks about anybody doing something difficult, whether you're trying to be a bodybuilder, an actor, an entrepreneur, whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to run into people on the outside that are going to doubt you, tell you can't do this. And he says that's normal. It's to be expected. You overcome that using this little trick. But the reason he said that was fascinating to me. He says because it's normal for other people to doubt you. But when you start doubting yourself, that's very dangerous. And that advice was so impactful that he's repeating it 3 or 4 decades after he learned that advice. He also talked about what a just remarkable woman she was. He said, I was very unknown in Hollywood. Years later, every single movie, every interview, anything I'd ever do, she watched it, would send me flowers, would send me a note saying, hey, you're doing such a good job, just constantly encouraging him to not give up and to keep pursuing his dream. And what's crazy is I never made the connection until I read this book, and I'll get to it in a little bit, but there was somebody like that in her life that played that role for her. Somebody who's a couple decades older that taught her. Her name's Leela Rogers. She's in this book. I'll get to that part eventually. And then the second reason I wanted to read her autobiography is because I like reading about people that do things that, quote unquote, they're not supposed to do. After many decades of being taken advantage of by other people, she bet on herself. She started her own company. She owned her show. She decided to control her own destiny. Not only was that extremely rare for an actor to do that, it was unheard of for a woman to do that at this period of time. If you study the early history of Hollywood, they just looked at as actresses as like a pretty young face that were disposable, that should just do what they're told. Lucy is not the kind of person that's ever going to do what she's told. And as a result, her and in partnership with her husband wind up innovating. They're credited. Think about how crazy it is, because we've seen all these people build generational wealth through owning like a syndicated sitcom rerun. So think about Jerry Seinfeld, the billions of dollars he's going to make over his life just from reselling his show over and over again. Lucy and Desi are credited as the innovators, the people that invented the idea that the syndicated rerun. And they pioneered that through the show they created, the I Love Lucy show. And they start the company before they start the show. The show becomes wildly successful. And as a result, Lucy becomes the first woman president of a major television studio ever. So I'm going to go into the introduction of this book. The book was published, I think, in the early 1993, and the copy I have in my hand smells like it's from 1993. Like stiff pages, some interesting aromas that are filling that are in front of me right now. So I want to go to. She's talking about what it was like how the hell do you adjust? You're growing up and your parents are two of the most famous people in the world. And she says these were not ordinary parents. And then she talks about the bizarre, how she can hear her mom, she can watch her mom, but she can't talk to her anymore. And she says, oddly, in some ways, after all these years, life goes on as if they are still here. She's talking about her parents. They're simply off somewhere, on location, perhaps, and unable to get to a phone. And then there's just good writing, because she goes on for a little bit about that. And then she goes, and then so many times you wish that they were still here, even if it was just for a few moments. But you quickly realize that the voices that once could both calm your fears and drive you so crazy are truly silent forever. And so in addition to the manuscript, there's also, she did this. She's working with an author that she would basically talk into a recorder. So that's why it sounds like from the first person. And you had the manuscript, and you had, now her daughter has these hours. She says, I had the chance to listen to some 20 hours of the original interviews. She has these tapes of her mom's voice recalling her life story. And so if you go back to the introduction, I think this is really important. This is something I'm trying to work on with my dad, because we didn't do this with my mom, unfortunately. Like, you document, you ask them questions, you interview them, you write it down, record it on video, whatever you have to do, because it talks about, now my parents are both gone from the daughter's perspective here. And yet I have one of the most remarkable comprehensive family histories ever documented. We just happen to you and I are able to read and to learn about their family histories. But for most people, it's not going to be the case. But I think this idea is really, really important. Create a comprehensive family history. Do it through writing, do it through audio, do it through video, I think is the idea here. And she puts into words why this is so important, because they discovered this after her mom died. So she's with her mom a few weeks before she passes, and she says, unfortunately, no one else had a chance to help her remember either. She died less than 3 weeks later. I remember thinking then how sadly ironic it was that my father should have gotten the chance to tell his story during his lifetime, because he wrote and published an autobiography while he was alive. I'm probably going to read it too, because his life story is insane as well. But then we'd never get to hear Mom's. And this is the important part. These two sentences right here is why I think it's so important for you and I to learn from this and to document the life stories of the loved ones that are still alive. To see her life as she saw it. It was sad for the family and it was sad for the world. And then luckily, this discovery rectifies that problem. And so I would say 80% of this book is her life story before her wild success with I Love Lucy. She was 40 years old when that show started, and her life starts with tragedy. And her dad dies extremely young. He dies of typhoid fever. So it says, my father's condition never improved. He died not long after the storm. He was only 28 years old, and my mother's 23. I was not yet 4, but I remember vividly the moment she told me Daddy was gone. I could tell you where the tables were, where the windows were, and what they looked out on. And she says, I think my mother was stunned by her unhappy circumstances. I can remember her shaking her head, saying softly, married before I was 18, a mother before I was 19, and widowed before I was 23. So she has this very disjointed childhood. Her mom has to find work. She's sent sometimes to live with grandmothers or family members. In this case, in the story, she's sent to live with her now new stepdad's strict parents, while her mom looks for a job and she hates it. And so says, I don't support, and they were like a very strict, disciplined family. She says, I don't suppose that hard work, discipline, and a perfectionist attitude towards my work did me any harm. This is something she actually learned from them. And that's another thing that's surprising to you, is just how committed she was to being the very best comedic actress she could ever be. She was a flat-out workaholic. In addition to reading this book, I also watched, there's a new movie about her that just came out recently. Nicole Kidman plays Lucy. Javier Bardem, who's this fantastic actor, he plays Desi. But something that movie highlights is her perfectionist nature. She'd work till 2 a.m, 3 a.m, going over lines, making sure every single thing is perfect. And so the reason I bring that to your attention now is because she's talking about early life experiences that made the impression on her how important it was to be essentially a perfectionist in your work and not being afraid of hard work and understanding the discipline. She was almost the opposite of her husband. Her husband would like to drink. He was crazy. He would take risks. Lucy was completely focused. These traits are a big part of my makeup today, as any of my coworkers will tell you. And when life seemed unbearable, I learned to live in my imagination and to step inside other people's skins. These are indispensable abilities for an actress. On the other hand, I have my grandmother Peterson to thank for the gnawing sense of unworthiness and insecurity that has haunted me for years. The Puritan idea that everything pleasurable is somehow bad almost ruined for me the first joys of our big I Love Lucy success. The hardest thing for me was getting used to the idea that I deserved it. Throughout the book, she calls her mother Dee Dee and her grandfather Daddy. So I don't want to confuse you there, but Dee Dee's a big character. She's essentially Lucy's best friend, and talks about looking back. She had to leave to make money. She had really no choice, and she felt really guilty about it. Dee Dee still feels guilty about the time we were apart, but I understand that circumstances forced our separation. When we speak of the slights, this is really important, and I found what Lucy's about to tell us to be true in my own life. When we speak of the slights of our childhood, it is hard to remember that often people were struggling to do their level best. This knowledge comes to you later in life once you have children of your own. And so later on in this chapter, she talks about, learning from those mistakes and doing something different. At this point in her life, her dad is dead. Her grandmother is dead. Her grandmother dies of typhoid fever at 28. Her grandmother dies at 51 years old of cancer. So her dad is dead. Her grandmother's dead. Her mom is gone all the time, and she's 11 years old. And she says, I miss not having her around all the time. It winds up being like her best friend. That day-to-day closeness that I try to give my own children. And so she's writing these words when she's now older than her grandmother was when she died. So her grandmother dies at 51. She's around 53, 54 when she's writing these words. And then she picks up on something at the very end of the chapter about her childhood that, it's a negative to go through, but if you can survive these environments, it makes you extremely strong. The way I would summarize what she's about to tell us is this investor, Josh Wolf, has this great saying. It's a great maxim I think of all the time. Chips on shoulders puts chips in pockets. People with happy childhoods never overdo. They don't strive to or exert themselves. They're moderate, pleasant, well-liked, and good citizens. Society needs them. But the tremendous drive and dedication necessary to succeed in any field, not only show business, often seems to be rooted in a disturbed childhood. And so Josh's point is, if you go through a tumultuous childhood, you have a disturbed childhood, it's going to put a chip on your shoulder, and you're going to want to have that tremendous drive to show people that they were wrong for discounting you. And so chips on shoulders puts chips in pockets. And then Lucy goes into more of being just this like runaway teenager, being very unhappy about her life circumstances. And we see this, that usually there's somebody in these life stories where you have an older person that actually takes time and demonstrates, hey, I actually care about you. Like, you have worth as an individual. Estee Lauder's uncle, her Uncle John, played the role that this principal is going to play for Lucy. So she says, I ran away a lot. I'd leave the classroom for a drink of water, and I would just never come back. I think my main need was for somebody to talk to confide in, some wise and sympathetic older person. My school principal, Bernard Drake, became such a person, and so she comes back and visits him many, many years later after she's world famous. Mr. Drake was the first person to label my exuberant feelings as talent and to urge me to get on the stage. And so from Estee Lauder's autobiography, she says, Uncle John had worlds to teach me. We constructed a laboratory of sorts. He was a skin specialist, so he was in the beauty industry, and that's, obviously where she built her empire. Uncle John had worlds to teach me. We constructed a laboratory of sorts in the tiny stable behind the house. Do you know what it means for a young girl to suddenly have someone take her dreams quite seriously, to teach her secrets? And so that is something she's writing many decades after it happens. In her case, the foundation of what the empire, the cornerstone of the empire that she's going to build. And she's saying this is extremely important if we have the ability to encourage young people. And so this idea, it's like, well, no, you're not a runaway. You're not a screw up. Who cares if you're not good at school? You're funny. You're an entertainer. People will pay for those skills. Why don't you get on the stage? And then her mother, she starts to become worried for her mother because her mom remarried, and that marriage was not a good marriage. So there's another, tumultuous relationship she had that she's seeing play out. Wait till we get to her marriage with Desi. It is wild. That summer that I was 14, and you can, if you want an illustration of that, watch that movie, Being the Ricardos, because it's in that movie as well as in this book. That summer that I was 14, an immense restlessness swept over me. Things weren't going too well at home. My mom and Ed got divorced 5 or 6 years later, but the first real fights and arguments started around this time. I worried about her and the hard life that she led. And even though her mom's going through a difficult time, she's an extremely supportive mother. And then Lucy hits on something here. It's like, I don't know what I want to be. I just know this ain't it. This is not, life has to be better than this. I had no thought of being an actress at that time. I just wanted to be somebody. And so she gets encouraged to try out at like a school play. And her mom is supportive from day one. Dee Dee never tried to hem me in. Be an actress? Sure, why not? She would sit up until midnight, many nights, sewing us costumes. So it's just a reminder to support our kids' goals. And then this continues at the end of high school. She's like, okay, I want to do this. This is how Lucy gets into acting school. And again, it's because of the love and support of her mother. I itched to go places and do things. Dee Dee was beside herself with worry about me. She finally decided that if I was bound to run away, it would be better if she helped and guided me. She said to me one day, Lucille, how would you like to go to dramatic school? My eyes popped. Could we afford it? I've already been to the bank, and remember, they do not have, I don't know if I should say remember, I haven't told you this. They don't have a lot of money at all. So the fact that this is what her mom does is just really, really amazing. My eyes popped. Could we afford it? I've already been to the bank, and they'll lend me the money, she said to me. My mother was always willing to go into debt for a good cause. So she goes to acting school in New York, and it does not go well. In short order, they discovered that I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, and I couldn't control my body or my voice properly. Both students and teachers ignored me, which almost seemed fitting. To me, everyone was head and shoulders above me in every way. At the end of the term, the school wrote my mother and said that they were sorry, but I didn't have what it takes to be an actress. Remember, this is a school that teaches acting. It's telling what is going to wind up being one of the most successful actresses that ever lives. That she can't do it. Sorry, you're not cut out for this. Remember what the advice that she gave Arnold. When they tell you no, you hear yes, and you act accordingly. Someone says, no, we can't do this movie, you hug him and you say, thank you for believing in me. There's so many examples in this book that she's giving that advice because that was her lived experience. Because these idiots right here are diminishing a young person's dream. And then what happens is many, many years later, people from the school, her former teachers, asked to meet her backstage. Like, we always knew you could do it. And she's like, no, you didn't. You said the very opposite. You kicked me out of the school. At the end of the term, the school wrote my mother and said, they're sorry, but I didn't have what it takes to be an actress. She would just be wasting her money if I continued. And so she gives a takeaway from this. She gets kicked out, and she just goes to New York and just tries to take any job possible. And this is the lesson here. I soon learned that to survive in theater, you have to be very strong, very healthy, and damned resilient. Rarely does anyone give you an encouraging word. The same advice for entrepreneurs right there, right? You have to be very strong, very healthy, very damn resilient. Rarely does anyone give you an encouraging word. And then we get into this excessive work ethic that she has her entire life. I'd show up early for rehearsals and stay until they had to sweep me off the stage. I didn't give up. I wore out the soles of my shoes, trudging up and down the street to casting offices. So there's years of this experience. I want to get to the punchline. I can't say that I was discouraged. For some incomprehensible reason, I knew that someday I would make it. She says, remember, there are practically no overnight successes. Before that brilliant hit performance came 10, 15, sometimes 20 years in the salt mines, sweating it out. So she winds up taking any job she can get. She's trying to do theater. She works in a bunch of shops. In this case, she's working in a very famous dress shop as a model. So like somebody comes in, they want to try on a dress. She'd put on the dress and walk out so they could look at it. And a lot of famous actresses, this is in New York City, are coming in, and essentially what she's doing what you and I are doing, except she's studying actresses, we're studying entrepreneurs, and I want to hit her punchline. So she says, Joan Crawford, Gloria Swanson, all these other people also came into the shop. I tried to analyze their styles, how they walked and moved, their hands, their eyes, what they wore, and how they talked. This is the main takeaway here. I didn't know it at the time, but I was storing up a lot of useful knowledge. So she has a lucky break. She winds up sitting for an artist that would draw like portraits and stuff. Remember, she'd do anything for money at this point. He winds up painting her portrait, then adding like some, I think dogs or wolves. I can't remember exactly right now, but and then selling that painting to a company. The company then uses it in their ads. The ads are placed everywhere. So then people start recognizing her from these ads, even though she didn't know she was sitting down for an ad. That's the first lucky break. At the same time, MGM has this thing called the Goldwyn Girls, and one of the girls gets sick or injured, and they need a last-minute replacement. So somebody that had recognized her from the ad say, "Hey, you'd be perfect. Can you go to California right now?" And so she has to jump on this opportunity with almost no notice. And she never. This is the very start. She didn't expect this, but this is the very start of her time in Hollywood, and she obviously never leaves. So it says, in those days, there was no definitive working hours. She's talking about early Hollywood. We slaved all day and sometimes until 3 a.m. So she's just like I don't even think she has words. I'm pretty sure she's just seen in the movie. It's called Roman Scandals. She says, Roman Scandals was supposed to be filmed in 6 weeks, but it stretched into 6 months. I loved everything about movie making, the money, meeting so many different kinds of people, the high excitement of each day. And then, so on this movie, she winds up being, because this was supposed to be a contract, and then once the movie's over, like your contract's up. She says there was another remarkable stroke of good luck. And so a young man was on the set. He said, "Hi, Lucy." He introduced himself as Russell Markert and reminded me that we had already met one time in New York. He was going to be a choreographer for a big film that was going to be filmed called Moulin Rouge. He was visiting the set to see if he could pick up some showgirls for the film. He wanted to know if I wanted to be in the film. The Goldwyn Girls, which she was a part of, was then loaned out en masse to 20th Century Fox. And so think about this as like something that she also didn't like too, is like you're on contract work. So she has a contract for a month, and then sometimes she has a contract for 6 months. And then she goes to different studios, and the studio will renew a contract on a yearly basis. But she didn't like that, because then you could just end your contract. You could try to go somewhere else, but she wanted control of her career. So this is like 20 years before, let's say 15 to 20 years of doing stuff like this before she's like, I want to run my own show. I want to like own the show. I want to be in complete control. I don't want to just be a contract person. But before I get there, she does have some good advice that she gets from this guy that recruited her, this Russell guy. He says, life was hectic, but the money was good. I thought I was doing great. And so she's probably making maybe $50 a week, $75 a week is what she's talking about here. She's going to sell her company for the equivalent of like $150 million today. So keep that in mind. So it says, I thought I was doing good, but Russell impressed upon me on the necessity of saving. You don't have to start a savings account with $1,000, he used to tell me. You can start with $1. On his advice, I put $25 into the bank every payday. Otherwise, he'd said, I would never survive the parched periods during in between pictures. And so she says, by this time, I was determined to stay in Hollywood. I would do what I had to make sure I could survive for the long haul. That's that long-term perspective again. I worked long, hard hours without complaint. I would work 16 hours a day. So there's a lot in her career that I'm obviously skipping over. She gets contracts. She's essentially like a B-list actor for a very, very long time. You could consider her a B-list actor until she starts I Love Lucy. And so she gets all these different contracts. She's making a little bit of money, and so she's like, okay, I need my best friend out here. I need my mom. The next day I phoned my mom and told Dee Dee to come out to Hollywood. When Dee Dee saw the little white bungalow in Hollywood, she burst into tears. This was one of the few times I ever saw her give way to her feelings. She came prepared to find work as a sales lady, but I put my foot down. Her working days were over, I told her. So her and her brother, she has a younger brother that's also working in Hollywood. She came out first, and her brother comes out, and then they start moving out the entire family. They move out her mom. They move out her grandfather, which she calls daddy. And so this is what she says about that. Keeping the household afloat was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I cherished every minute of it. It was tough going financially at times. I was earning only $50 a week, and Freddie was making about the same. But it gave me a real purpose in life. I felt wanted and needed, and I was grateful to have the family together again. Each morning I'd get up at 6 so I could be at the studio by 7 o'clock. And the crazy thing is she's working for RKO Studios, right? And so she's still in her early life. She's saying I had to get up at 6, I had to get up at 7. But now she's writing this. She worked at RKO. Now when she's writing it, she owned the studio. And she says something here that's a great flex. The same guard greets me at the front gate today. So I mentioned earlier the role she played for Arnold. She mentored him. She tried to take care of him. She tried to do whatever she could. She winds up doing live theater and being mentored by a master. And so this is Ginger Rogers' mother. Ginger Rogers was a famous actress at the time, and her name's Leela. So it says the wonderful thing about Leela was that she was a mom, quote unquote, to a bevy of young stars, young struggling stars. She directed RKO's Little Theater. Remember this for later. Remember this part for later. This is wild. I just remember this now rereading it. She directed RKO's Little Theater, where promising young people from other studios came to be tutored by this wise, warm woman. And then she realizes that Lucy has talent, and she has a conversation with her. What would you give to be a star in 2 years? Leela asked me. Gee, what do you mean? I responded. Would you give me every breath you draw for 2 years? Will you work 7 days a week? Will you sacrifice all of your social life? I certainly will, I promised. Okay, she said. Let's start. Leela was the first person to see me as a clown with glamour. It was such a busy, happy time for me. Leela took off the dungarees and put me into a dress. She's talking about doing this for her and also a bunch of other young stars, or young struggling, soon to be stars, or want to be stars. She made us read good literature to improve our English and expand our understanding of the character. Leela taught us to dedicate ourselves to our work and to ignore the nerve-wracking rumors of calamity issuing from the front office. I never played politics at RKO, and it wouldn't have helped if I had. RKO had 11 presidents in 14 years. Leela advised us to work on ourselves and pay no attention to corporate machinations. Leela taught us never to see anyone as bigger or more important than ourselves. And then she takes this mindset and runs with it. I'm going to tell you something else that's smart that Lucy said. There's all these like inserts with pictures and a quick caption. I do want to read one to you because this was also surprising to me, and it's something that's also in the movie if you happen to watch it. That the fact that radio gave Lucy the audience recognition and acclaim that had so far eluded her in movies. So again, she's a B-list actress in movies. She does this radio show that's a 30-minute weekly radio show that is so successful. CBS Television's like, hey, we want to adapt this like an idea, a show very similar to the radio you're doing can we adapt this to TV? Ooh, I'm not being clear at all there. So take the radio show, put it on TV. That's when she's like, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it with my husband, and I want to own the show. So that radio show becomes the cornerstone of her empire. But this is something smart that Lucy's realizing even when she's young. She's really the importance of having a positive mental attitude, the importance of learning from other people's experience, and just don't complain. There's something that Charlie Munger said that popped in my mind when I was reading this, and I'll tell you that in a minute. So Lucy says, I believe that we're as happy in life as we make our minds to be. All actors and actresses, no matter how talented or famous, have ups and downs in their careers. It's just the nature of business. One of her other mentors, I'll skip over the name, used to tell me about dozens of Hollywood people who ran into trouble. This was comforting, like reading an autobiography and thinking, well, that happened to them too. I'm not the only one. At RKO was known for being the starlet who never complained. And so something that I think about all the time is what Charlie said. I think about a lot of things that Charlie says, but Charlie drummed in the notion that a person should always do the best that you can do, never tell a lie, and if you're going to say you're going to do it, get it done. Nobody gives a shit about an excuse. Leave for the meeting early. Don't be late. But if you are late, don't bother giving people excuses. Just apologize. They're due the apology, but they're not interested in the excuse. So one of the, I think, saddest things is that by far she winds up having a second marriage. She gets married to her second husband. She's married to him till she dies. They're actually married longer, like for 31 years. She was only married to Desi for 20. But Desi's, you could see in the book. In this book, she's already remarried, and it's about she was completely obsessed with Desi. But they had a very tumultuous relationship. It's in the book, but it's also in the movie. They're either fighting or having sex. And it's the extremes of, like, they had an intensely passionate love affair. And unfortunately, it didn't end the way she wanted, because she talks a lot in this book about the kind of marriage that she wanted. She starts saying, like, what her grandparents had, and she talks about having a home, and what she meant is, like, not having a house to live in, but like a home with, like, a husband and kids and, like, a loving environment. But essentially, think about it like what she didn't have growing up. She had a very fractured family. She moved around a lot, lived in different places, ran away, and she's like, I want home. I want home. And so she talks about her grandparents' relationship. I knew no force on heaven or earth would be strong enough to pull those two apart. That's the kind of marriage I wanted. I respected this producer's talent. So she talks about in Hollywood, like, a lot of these stars are sleeping their way to the top. And so they're constantly getting approached. And so she gets approached by a married man. He's very powerful. But she's like, I can't, like, I'm not going to break up her. He's got young kids. I'm not going to break up their marriage. And so she winds up getting blackballed because of this. So she says, that's the kind of marriage I wanted. I respected this producer's talent. He was attractive, young, and vital, but I couldn't allow myself to fall in love with him because of his wife and children. And so his wife winds up finding out. He's trying to leave her for Lucy, and Lucy's like, no, I don't want to be with you. And all of her friends are saying, you messed up. You don't understand how this business works. All of my friends said, you dope. If you had married that guy, you would be on top. Now you'll never make it, and the wife will get all the other Hollywood wives to blackball you. So this winds up being, she stuck to her convictions. It winds up, at the time she didn't realize it winds up being a good thing, because she has a lull in the roles she's getting, and so she has to look around. So she says, I had to give Hollywood a rest and look around for other showcases for my talent. I wound up trying radio. This turned out to be one of the smartest things I ever did. And so that's what I was tying together earlier, how the fact is this weird circumstance causes her to not get roles for a little bit. And then she's like, okay, I'll do radio. The fact that she was so good at radio winds up getting her noticed by CBS television. And then that's going to launch, to her. She goes from, orders of magnitude higher levels of fame than when she was just on the radio, or whether she was, playing minor roles in like these B-list movies. So then she gets into one of the most important relationships, the most important relationship she ever has in her life, and that's the one with Desi Arnaz. And so she's dating an older director. He's like 20 years older than her, and she's like, listen, we're dating, but we know we're not in love. And she's like, but it was a stable relationship, so I stayed. It was very stable. We didn't fight. It's going to be the opposite of what she has with Desi. She says, this was an easy, relaxed relationship that continued until a Cuban skyrocket burst over my horizon. And so she sees him performing, and she says, I couldn't take my eyes off Desi Arnaz. I recognized this kind of electrifying charm that can never be faked. He had star quality. At the end of the day shooting, I was in slacks and a sweater. My face was washed, and my long hair pulled neatly back in a row. Desi didn't recognize me as the wild woman he had met at lunch, so they had met on set, but she was dressed up and she had like a black eye, as if her partner in the movie had beat her. she looked like crap. And so at the end of the day, she changes, and then she runs into him again. That's what she's describing here. Desi didn't recognize me as the wild woman he had met at lunch and had to be introduced all over again. He invited me to dinner, and I accepted. We went to a nightclub. But instead of joining the conga line, we sat at a small table talking and talking and talking. I might as well admit that here, now and there, I fell in love with Desi in 5 minutes. There was only one thing better than looking at Desi, and that was talking to him. And so now she's going to give us a background. This also makes it interesting to read his autobiography. He grew up in Cuba. His family owned cattle ranches and townhouses. Desi's father was the mayor of Santiago. His mother was a famous beauty and one of the heirs to the Bacardi rum fortune. Then came one of those revolutions that frequently erupted in Cuba. Desi and his mother were alone at one of their family ranches when they woke to shouts of gunfire, and then the rebels are burning down their house. Desi's father was locked up. All the family property was confiscated. They lost everything. He's 17 years old. Desi was 17 when he arrived penniless in Miami. When Desi, his father had escaped as well, he says when Desi saw his father, the former mayor of Santiago, one of Cuba's biggest cities, chasing rats with a stick so he could eat, he put his head in his hands and cried. And so he was obsessed with music, and he tries to make it working at nightclubs in Miami. He soon learned, and then she gives us advice that he followed, that she followed, and I say almost every entrepreneur does. He soon learned that in striking out on your own, you have to throw out your chest and sell yourself. And then she brings us back into present day when she's telling the story. Everyone at the studio knew I was starry-eyed over Desi, and most of them warned me against him. But I had flipped. I had never been so sold on any man before. And so she talks about the problems in their relationship. Is winds up later on. He's an alcoholic. He's really smart, and he makes a lot of good business decisions too. But he's drinks every night. He's working in nightclubs. He builds this he's an actor and producer and everything else. But he also built this extremely successful band, and they wind up playing. They're on the road, or they're playing every night. So he's out till 4 a.m, whatever the case is. He cheats on her all the time. That's in the book. That's in the movie. There was just no changing him. So she says, our outlooks on life were very different. I wanted a masterful husband, God knows, and part of me wanted to be cherished and cared for. But all my life I'd been taught to be strong and self-reliant and independent, and I wondered if I could change. Desi was a romantic. She's talking about the different way that they approach life. Desi was a romantic. He lived to enjoy life and never thought of tomorrow. I was a level-headed realist who never lived beyond my means or went overboard drinking or gambling. So he loved to drink, he loved to gamble. Obviously, he loved to be with different women all the time. We were both head over heels in love, and we both longed with all of our hearts for a home for our own and children, a home of our own and children. But everything else in the picture seemed hopelessly negative. We agreed that night we could never marry. So they want to be married. I think it's like within the first few months of meeting. So they're having this discussion. They're having this long talk. She's about to leave to go to a show. And they're just saying, we're too different. We have different religions. We have different everything. Like, we love each other. We're addicted to each other. But, we can't get married. This is a bad idea. So she leaves the next day. I thought everything was over, but Desi couldn't say goodbye. He phoned me almost every hour. Then I took a train to Milwaukee, more depressed than I'd ever been in my whole life. And so Desi, she just said that he doesn't think about tomorrow. Desi's phoning her, he's sending her telegrams. He told me that he was so upset about me staying in Milwaukee, he had been arranging an elopement. He had postponed it 5 times. But I thought we decided we couldn't get married, I said. That's right, he agreed, but we are. I went to bed deliriously happy. And so what she did, she has a contract to be on a show in Milwaukee. She dips out on the contract. She goes back to New York, and they wind up getting married. Inwardly, I was terrified at what I was doing. I knew how, this is funny, I knew how Latins can be, how jealous and possessive. In many ways, marrying Desi was one of the boldest things I ever did. I wanted him, and only him, as the father of my children. And so this goes on. These quotes I'm reading you are hopping over many, many pages. This gives you an insight into just how they were. You've probably, I don't know if even if you haven't experienced a relationship with like this, you probably have seen friends that do this. Like, they're not compatible. They fight, but they are completely addicted and obsessed with each other. That's the way I would think about their relationship. This marriage had to work. I would do anything, sacrifice anything to make Desi happy. It was November 30th, 1940, the most momentous day of my life. And so now I'm a few chapters later. This is in the movie as well. One night soon after we married. So this is a relationship of extremes. This is the note I left myself here. One night soon after we were married, Desi and I had a loud fight. The next morning, I got out of bed at dawn and walked outside. We had a brand new station wagon parked there. I took a hammer and walked around the new car, smashing every window. What satisfaction that was. Then I telephoned Andy Hickox, that's her business manager, and told him to get it fixed at my expense. In those early years, our fights were a kind of lovemaking. Desi and I enjoyed them, but they exhausted our friends and family. I don't believe he ever really intended to settle down and become a good, steady, faithful husband. But we remained very deeply and passionately in love. And she talks about that later on. She's like, I'm one of the most famous people in the world, and my husband is out there embarrassing me, getting photographed and caught with other women. Like, how much of this can I possibly take? And it seems like that was one-sided. It seems like she was completely faithful to him. She talks about she's relatively young. I think she's around 30. She's 30 years old around this time. She says, my biggest disappointment in life then was not having children. My scrapbooks of my early days in Hollywood, even before I was married, are filled with magazine illustrations of adorable pink-cheeked children. When I'd write next to each picture. When, and when, and when. So she's looking back on her diary, her notebook of that time. And so this is something you and I talk about all the time. Like, what is the main motivation for entrepreneurs? Like, why the hell are we doing this insane thing that we're doing? Why don't we just go get a job? Many people think, it's because of the money. I think if you were to ask them, it's because control. You want control over your work, your working life. It's going to be a third of your life, maybe half of the time that you're actually conscious. You want control over it. That's way more important than the money. She's experiencing the same thing because there's all these. She's essentially just like, and I went into detail a little bit. There's still a bunch of books I'm going to I'm going to read about the early days of Hollywood because I think it's fascinating. Like with the founders of the movie industry. Movies. One of my favorite things to do is watch a movie. Just last night, I rewatched Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's one of my favorite things to do, but so I'm surprised I haven't done this yet. I've only read, I think, 1 or 2 books on the movie industry, but if you go back and listen to Founders number 173, The Life and Times of Louis B. Mayer, you realize like there's like a lot of like Harvey Weinstein vibes of the early days where it's just like they're controlled by powerful men. The actresses are seen as like sex objects or kind of disposable. Like they can just interchange and throw them away because there's just a million other people arriving every day that want to be stars. And she just wants control of her own work. She goes, once again, I learned the bitter lesson that directors and producers can make or break an actress. I was a star, but I felt I couldn't afford to turn down parts for fear of infuriating these bigwigs. If I did turn down a script, which I never did, I would be put on suspension without salary. I couldn't accept an offer from another studio, no matter how good. Yet I could be fired at any time without the bosses showing cause. So again, this is going to turn her in from an actress to an entrepreneur. All the glittering stars were at the mercy of the whims of the top people. So she's doing theater. She does vaudeville acts. She's like a funny. She has a traveling comedian show, kind of like a gag. I don't even know how to describe it, I guess. But she's also appearing in a bunch of movies, like these B-list movies. We go back to the fact that she almost got divorced. She gets divorced, so she got married in 1940, divorced in 1960, the day after the show ends. And but they almost get divorced here, and we get a good indication of these two very unique people. During the summer of 1944, Desi had stopped coming home. One night I tossed sleeplessly until dawn, wondering where our marriage had gone awry and what I had done wrong. Finally, I hit upon a desperate measure. I still loved Desi, but I decided to divorce him. The night before I was scheduled to make my appearance in court, Desi showed up at our house. He was contrite and his most charming self. So they wind up spending the night together, and then this is a surprise. The next morning, I climb out of bed, and I started to put on a suit. Where are you going, Desi wanted to know. I'm going to court to divorce you, I told him. I told the judge that Desi had caused me grievous mental suffering. And that's the sad part, because she's just so she's lovable. Like, you read this book, and you're like, I love her. You can see why so many, 60 million people would watch her show. So I told it, and it's just sad. Like, it reminds me, and this is probably like some kind of something subconscious going on. It's just like this. I just feel bad. Like, she loved him and she wanted it to work, and I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like the suffering I feel like my mom had to go through in her life and her marriage as well. And it's just you don't want to experience that as a person, right? An individual, but you sure as hell don't want to see like people you love and are very important to you have to go through this. And yet,
it just occurs over and over again. So reading this, these things come back to you. It's just like, ugh, it's just terrible. So it says, I told the judge that Desi had caused me grievous mental suffering. Like this, that's terrible. I didn't expect Desi to be around when I got back, but he was. He looked white and stricken. Lucy, he said, the next time I marry, I'm going to be a better husband. And the next time I marry, I'm going to be a better wife, I answered truthfully. Desi's face brightened. Then why don't we both try it out on each other, he suggested. I didn't believe Desi could change, but he did for a time. I paid $2,000 in fees for the divorce I never got, but it was worth it. For a long time, Desi came home every night, and we both tried very hard to make things work. I closed my eyes, put my blinders on, and ignored what was too painful to think about. So she mentioned earlier how helpful it was to have mentors to explain stories of people in Hollywood and their ups and downs in their career. She says it was like reading an autobiography. You realize, hey, this has happened to me too. Her career is full of that until she gets to Lucy, and then from there, once she's in control, like it never relents. So she says, I had a driving, consuming ambition to succeed in show business. But here's the problem. My movie career had seemed to be stalled. I wasn't getting anywhere. The years were speeding by. I was still childless, and my dream of co-starring with Desi and working side by side as a team seemed hopeless. And so she's being manipulated, taken advantage of, and she talks about, hey, they do this. They only do this to you because you're weak, so make yourself strong. But of course, I'm in a different position now. They only pick on you when you can be picked on. After you reach a certain level, they wouldn't dare treat you so rudely. So there's this huge economic recession in the movie industry. It was just like 2 decades of straight up growth, and or maybe I guess there was a slowdown to it during the Depression, but there was many years of this bull market. You can think about this. So in the 40s, there's MGM, which is the largest studio at the time, winds up losing a bunch of money. So it says in 1948, the movie industry was in panic. The year before, MGM had lost $6.5 million. Now budgets were being slashed. Like many of my colleagues, I had began to cast a speculative eye towards radio. So this is the radio before I Love Lucy. We're in 1948. I think the show starts in 1951. So she's doing a radio show. She says, I did a series called My Favorite Husband. It was a half-hour weekly show. The writers on My Favorite Husband, she starts naming them. They wind up being writers on Lucy. Their names aren't important, but the fact is she found a good team early, and she kept that team together. They would become particularly this connection would become particularly fruitful in the years to come. In 1949, Desi and I instituted a stay-at-home policy. I was still childless, which caused me great heartache. Desi and I talked far into the night. We finally decided that Desi would give up his cross-country tours and only take local engagements. We would also talk to the doctors to see why we could not get pregnant. So she had, I think, 2 miscarriages up until this point. I told Desi that I would try to be a better wife, more loving and more understanding. So they're just talking about, she's like, I'm doing okay in my career, but my relationship is still up and down. And so they want to do better in their career, they want to do better as a marriage, and they want to have kids. And the note I left myself on this page is just she's got founder mentality. In 1950, Desi and I decided that since nobody else seemed to have faith in us as a team, they'd went around trying to shop them having a show based on them. Almost like an early version of I Love Lucy, and everybody said no. Remember, they're saying no to what eventually turns into one of the most successful TV shows of all time, man. Just keep going. In 1950, Desi and I decided that since nobody else seemed to have faith in us as a team, we'd form our own company to promote ourselves. Desi Lou Productions was launched. We put together a Mr. and Mrs. Vaudeville act. So she would do like a stand-up prop routine. He would play music. They'd wind up touring it around. It says we broke the act around San Diego and San Francisco at various Army camps. This is a precursor to I Love Lucy. When word got around that we were liked, 6 months' worth of theater contracts materialized throughout the USA. So they start doing it locally. People like it. Then they start taking it on the road. At the same time, her radio show is being successful. She gets approached by CBS, so she has the idea, hey, let's combine these two. We'll make an amalgamation or a combination of the radio show, like a variation of what I'm doing on My Favorite Husband, with this chemistry, this on-screen chemistry and talent that me and my husband have, and we'll own the show. And so there's many innovations that they actually make. They're the first people to do a lot of things. Like I said earlier, they're the innovators of the syndicated rerun, which is pretty wild. But they're also talking about they embraced they embraced TV, even though people said you can't do TV because you'll never act again. This is going to remind me of something that Bill Gates and Walt Disney both learned. So it says, at the time, television was regarded as the enemy by Hollywood. So terrified was Hollywood of this medium movie, people were afraid to even make guest appearances, meaning, she's embracing it. So Walt Disney, he backed out of a deal. I think it was with United Artists, because at the time there was only like 2,000 television sets in the entire world, and I want to say it's United Artists, whatever the company is. They're like, hey, we want to do this deal. We'll give you the money that you need for the financing that you're looking for, but we have we want television rights to all the characters that you had made previously. And Disney was like, no. And if you remember from Walt Disney's career, like, he was obsessed with having control. He lost control of his first company. And he said, right before he died, he said he was most proud of two things. One, starting his company and being able to keep control of it, which he failed to do for his first company. So now, not just starting, he's like, keeping control of my own company. And the second thing was Disneyland. And so Walt Disney's like, remember, he's doing movies at the time. He's like, no, I was like, this medium's growing. Like, I'm going to always keep control and ownership. And obviously being really, really smart doing that, because that launched the second thing he was most proud of was Disneyland. Remember, he had that show on ABC. ABC not only helped finance Disneyland, but he did a weekly show as they constructed as they were constructing Disneyland. And, you know, he's hosting the show. And that builds up, and it's almost like his version of working in public, which is very popular to do to this day. So by that time, the show was so popular. Of course, he's talking about Disneyland all the time. They opened Disneyland, and it wound up being the greatest, the largest traffic jam in Orange County history, the opening of Disneyland. And so he knew you embrace new mediums. The note I left myself is that you go with the new phenomenon, not against it. Why did I mention Bill Gates? Because Bill Gates ignored... in the first book I did on him, Hard Drive, he's ignoring the internet. In Overdrive, the sequel to that book, which is also in the archive, he bets his entire company on it. And he realizes, like, the internet is growing so fast, it's a phenomenon. When you have phenomenons like this, like television wind up becoming, you know, you have a couple thousand, however many people have it. Now people have multiple TVs or whatever the case is moving forward, or in present day rather, is like, it's foolish. Like, you're going upstream. Like, you've got to go with these phenomenons. And so Lucy was quick to that realization. It's like, well, I'm going to try TV. They say I'll never get a movie role again. Well, I'll just do TV then. And then some other innovations. Says Desi suggested that we film the show live in front of an audience. This wasn't common at the time. The network people screamed. A film show cost twice as much as a live one. And what's crazy is, so they would used to do they would broadcast live, right? Instead of filming it. And so therefore, after it ran, they wouldn't have copies of the show anymore. And so they do another smart thing here, where they're like, okay, CBS is like, no, we don't want to do this because a film show costs twice as much. So it says the sponsor wouldn't put up any more money, and neither would CBS. So Desi made an offer. In return for a $1,000 weekly salary cut for us, we were given complete ownership of the show. So CBS owns it when it is broadcast. Once that broadcast ends, Desi and Lucy own it. This is crazy that the CBS gave it up for so cheap, for $1,000 a week, right? Because what's crazy, remember this for later, they're going to, I think like 8 years or into the future somewhere from here, Desi and Lucy are going to sell it back to CBS for millions and millions of dollars, then use that money to buy their own studio. Okay, so but we're not there yet, and she's talking about like what were their expectations at the very beginning. Just thought, oh, maybe it'll survive, maybe it won't. Desi and I were excited and happy, planning our first big venture together. I thought that I Love Lucy was a pleasant little situation comedy that might even survive its first season. 60 million people are going to watch the show. To my delight, I discovered that I Love Lucy show drew from... Oh, this is so important, because we talk about all how all the experiences, everything that you're learning now can open up potential opportunities that you can't possibly predict in the future. So you never waste a day. You're constantly learning from the experiences you have at work, doing professional research, reading, doing all this other stuff. And she talks about this here. To my delight, I discovered that the I Love Lucy show drew from everything that I had learned in movies, radio, theater, and vaudeville. I wanted everything about the venture to be top flight. We argued a good deal at first because we all cared so passionately. Sometimes we discuss phrasing a word or emphasis in a line of dialogue until past midnight. And then it gets into just how crazy this experience was. I Love Lucy has been called the most popular television show of all time. Our shows changed the Monday night habits of America. Remember, I was trying to explain this to my daughter the other day. She's like, she doesn't even understand commercials. But then she's just like, wait, so you had to, because she's also reading a biography of Lucille Ball at the same time I am, like a kid's version. And she's like, she talked about what I'm about to tell you, how like water usage would go down. And she's like, well, you couldn't, so what happens if you have to go to the bathroom during a show? Like, can you just like pause it or rewind it or just watch it later? I'm like, no, you would just miss it. Completely blows her mind. It's like, I don't understand. Everything's on demand in my life. What are you guys talking about? So it says, I Love Lucy has been called the most popular television show of all time. Our show changed the Monday night habits of America. Between 9 and 9:30, taxis disappeared from the streets of New York. Marshall Field's department store in Chicago hung up a sign, "We love Lucy too, so from now on we'll be open Thursday nights instead of Monday." Telephone calls across the nation dropped sharply during that half hour, as well as the water flush rate as whole families sat glued to their seats. That's insane. So it takes off like a rocket. It becomes the number one TV show, I think, within like the first year or two, maybe definitely by year 3. But she points out something here. It's like, you have to be careful what you wish for. Like, you might think, oh, I want to be the number one show. I want to be the best. I want to be the biggest. And she makes the point, it's like, no, I would have taken, if you have half the success, you have more money than you ever need, right? But you have way less stress. You might get 50% of the money and have 90% less stress. You want to take that transaction if you can. Having the love and adoration of millions was wonderful and thrilling, but I could have done with half of our success, for it came with a lot of new stress. And she talks about in the book, like, I'm loved by everybody, but she found her level of fame disorienting. Outsiders who don't understand think we have a chip on our shoulder, but it's not that at all. We're just so used to failure, to being hurt, and to being rebuffed that we can easily come unhinged by success. So she's got a couple of emotional breakdowns in here. She winds up getting help, seeking, having somebody to talk to. Remember, she's wildly successful, but at the apex of her success is the worst time in her relationship. And then she also has to reconcile with imposter syndrome and just all this self-doubt. While we were at the peak of our popularity, I continued to feel guilt-ridden and anxious. I don't deserve all this love and adulation, I would tell myself. So she's under an unbelievable amount of stress. Not only do they're running Lucy, but they have a bunch of other shows. They do Star Trek, Mission Impossible. There's a bunch of shows that they own through their production company, their studio. That is starting to weigh heavy on both Desi and Lucy. So it says, I've never seen Desi in such a state. I was terrified he was going to seriously hurt himself. I realized for the first time how the strain of our snowballing empire was eating away at him. As we began, they thought they were going to leave, right? Check this out. This is wild. As we began the 1956 season, I Love Lucy show was still on top of the heap, and we faced with a hard decision. Should we retire or not? Originally, we had planned a 5-year stint with television, and all of our contracts had been written with this deadline in mind. Then we had planned to quit, take the kids, and sail leisurely around the world. What would have happened? Because 4 years later, they keep going. They wind up getting divorced, and their family breaks up. But like most idyllic dreams, this one didn't seem too practical on closer inspection. It was tremendous, and here's the problem. And it's a good problem and a bad problem to have. It was tremendously exciting building a new company. From 7 employees, we had grown to 1,000, and not one of them had resigned in Desilu, that's their production company, Desilu's 5 years of existence. Besides I Love Lucy, we owned 6 other shows on television. And how do you quit a number one show? I wasn't ready to sit gazing at this mountain. So essentially, they talked about this earlier. When they were less busy, they would just sit in their backyard and look at the mountains. So she's saying, how do you quit it when you're on top? That's extremely difficult. I wasn't ready to sit and relax and essentially just have leisure. She does find another activity. She winds up teaching acting. She really likes teaching and helping young people. And so this is when she decides, hey, I want to give back just like Leela gave to me. Remember I said she had this little RKO theater, right? Well, now, in this point in the story, Lucy owns RKO. That's when I remembered how much I enjoyed my teaching experience and decided to reactivate Leela Rogers' theater workshop on the RKO lot. Her original theater was still standing, although it cost $90,000 to put it back into shape. My idea was to give some talented youngsters a boost in show business. So she comes full circle. Unfortunately, she's at the peak of her professional success, but she is personally miserable. So it says Desi was the studio's top salesman, chief executive officer, and programming director. We had just concluded our company's most successful year with $24 million of gross business and net profits over $800,000. Things had never been better for Desilu. We wish we could say the same for Desi and Lucy. The following spring, I made my last effort towards a reconciliation with Desi. Desi was restless, uncommunicative, and bored. I was completely disenchanted, bitter, and unforgiving. And the kids saw and heard way too much. I realized that we never really liked each other. We had a great attraction going for each other in the beginning, but we didn't approve of each other. I was disapproved He disapproved of my moderation and my conservatism. I was a square, he said. I disapproved of the way he worked too hard, played too hard, and was never moderate in anything. It was like living on top of a volcano. You never knew when it would erupt or why. I want to pause here where she just said, I realized we never really liked each other. She's like, we fell in love. We were in love before we were in like. Her next marriage is completely opposite. She's like, we liked each other, and then we learned to love each other. She was just looking for some kind of stability. But this fiery, passionate love affair she had for 2 decades is just, as she said, it's like living on top of a volcano. I'm a strong, independent woman, but making myself weaker didn't help Desi. I had to realize that deep down he wanted to make all the mistakes in the book and wanted to suffer the consequences. He's also a full-blown alcoholic at this point. He needed to punish himself. Towards the end of our marriage, he was practically jumping out of windows. I was at fault too. I had lost my good humor and sense of proportion. When you're too mad and too rattled to see straight, you're bound to make mistakes. You can't go on and on for years being miserable about a situation and not have it change you. You get so you can't stand yourself. And I just wrote, damn. By the spring of 1960, Desi and I were totally estranged, although we still had to be both actor and director on the show. How crazy is this? The fun was gone. It saddened our entire crew to watch the painful disintegration of what had been our Camelot. In one of our last shows, I played a geisha girl. My eyes were red from hours of weeping. Whenever I looked at Desi, I could feel my expression hardening. Cold, implacable hate oozed through every pore, for Desi and for myself too. I loathed my new self, but I couldn't bring myself to ask Desi for a divorce. He had to be the one to make the break. Soon after this episode was shot, Desi asked me for a divorce. I had a lawyer in his office in 20 minutes. And then she talks about just completely changing her life. I planned to do a movie with Bob Hope that summer, then a Broadway musical. After that, the children and I would live in Switzerland. I wanted to get as far away from Hollywood and Desi as humanly possible. He could run Desi-Lou, and I would remove myself permanently. It didn't work out that way, but that was my original idea. And so the stress is too much for him as well, so he winds up leaving. In 1957, RKO Studios became Desi-Lou Studios. In 1962, Lucille bought out Desi's controlling interest in the company, thus becoming the first woman president of any major television studio ever. So they get divorced in 1960. She gets remarried in 1961. She's writing this book in 1964. And fortunately, she still lives another 25 years after this, but there's a happy ending. Desi seems to be much happier and healthier now in retirement. I'm glad for our children's sake that they now have 2 happy homes rather than one miserable, unhappy home. Desi and I keep in close touch about the children in a way we never could when we were married. I'm grateful for the amicable feeling now between Desi and me and Gary, her new husband, and the children. Desi phones me often to discuss the children or the show, and he plays golf with Gary. Since our lives have been straightened out, the children have improved in their schoolwork and they laugh more. Children internalize their parents' unhappiness. Fortunately, they absorb our contentment just as readily. I'm happiest when I'm working, rising to challenges. I've become a woman with a capacity for happiness again. And that is where I'll leave it. This was a fun little book. It's 200 pages. If you want to pick it up, you can read it really quickly. If you want to buy it, if you buy it using the link that's in the show notes on the podcast, on your podcast player, you'll be supporting the podcast at the same time. If you want to see every single book in reverse chronological order, you can go to amazon.com/shop/Founders Podcast. If you buy a book, any of the books, the podcast, that'll be supporting the podcast at the same time. If you want to buy a gift subscription for a friend, family, coworker, that link is in the show notes as well. That is 230 books down, 1,000 to go, and I'll talk to you again soon.